The Spanish Inquisition was one of the most turbulent eras in both medieval and modern times. Many people were tortured and even executed for being heretics as a result of the numerous laws and religious persecutions that were implemented. Due to their ties to the Catholic Church, the Spanish wanted to purge the countries under their authority of religious criminals. To do this, they devised a range of torture techniques that would be applied to coerce a confession from a person under suspicion of heresy. Many of these, like the usage of the rack, were shockingly barbarous. A lot of places employed the rack, which caused bones to break and torn limbs from their sockets. The breaking wheel, another technique, involved strapping a defendant to a wheel and then striking them with clubs and other objects to shatter bones. The entire purpose of the Spanish Inquisition was to impose a rigid religious code on the populace, and by employing harsh tactics like these, thousands of individuals were put to death. The Inquisition is thought to have executed well over 30,000 people. The hair shirt. The hair shirt was a garment made out of animal hair used by Catholics in the early days of Christianity as a method of repentance during Lent. During the Spanish Inquisition, it was used after a voluntary or post-torture confession. It represented the outward acceptance of the teachings of the Church and was required that people publicly proclaim their devotion to God, Jesus, and the Church. The tribunal would sentence a person to wear a hair shirt for several hours in a public space such as a market or square. Wearers who were publicly embracing the Church would go without food and water for the duration of their sentence. Climates in the New World varied, but the heat and humidity seemed constant. Torture chamber. Torture chambers were windowless rooms that held the modes of torture used by the Spanish Inquisition in the New World. Conquistadors made initial contact with native populations and read a proclamation that stated all the people, plants, and animals on the land were now subjects of the Spanish crown. Clerics read the rites of baptism, which meant that all native populations were now members of the Church and expected to follow Church doctrine. The viceroyalties of the New World included New Spain, Peru, Rio de la Plata, and New Granada, making it impossible for accused heretics to travel from the high elevations of the Andes down to Buenos Aires to a torture chamber. The torture happened in public spaces instead of in dark, windowless rooms beneath a prison, an attempt by the tribunal and Spanish officials to ensure that the native population that had involuntarily become Christian adhered to Church doctrine. Strapado. A method of torture known as strapado was first used by the medieval Inquisition. According to one version, the accused's hands were bound behind his back, and the rope was either fastened to a pulley or looped over a support in the chamber's roof. When he was dangling from his arms, the subject was then raised. The shoulders could get dislocated as a result of this. The patient would occasionally be jerked up and down by a series of drops the tormentors inserted. The feet and ankles could be weighted to make the hanging even more agonizing. Rack. Another popular kind of torture used during the Inquisition was the rack. At either one or both ends of a wooden or metal frame, the victim had his hands and feet chained or fastened to rollers. The rollers were cranked by the tormentor using a handle, which gradually dragged the chains or ropes and stretched the victim's joints, frequently to the point of dislocation. The torturer could have severed the accused's arms and legs if they had kept turning the rollers. Frequently, witnessing someone else being brutally tortured on rack was enough to induce a confession from another person. Inquisitors frequently utilized additional forms of corporal punishment on the alleged heretics while they were mounted on the strapado or the rack. They included heated metal pincers, boots, thumb screws, and other tools that could burn, pinch, or otherwise mutilate the victim's hands, feet, or other body orifices. Although mutilation was theoretically prohibited, Pope Alexander IV ruled in 1256 that inquisitors could absolve one another of whatever wrongdoing they may have committed during sessions of torture. Because they believed it was their responsibility to restore the accused to the faith, inquisitors needed to compel a confession. The accused was pardoned if he made a sincere confession, but he was typically still required to atone for his crimes by carrying many large crosses or going on pilgrimages. The inquisitors may condemn the accused to life in prison if he refused to confess. Serial offenders, those who admitted their guilt, then publicly denied it and resumed their heretical behavior, could be abandoned to the secular arm. Aren't you thanking your lucky stars that you were not born in those days? What are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments section down below. Thanks for watching. See you again soon in another video.